This was the real-life Homer Simpson, and it's quite disturbing. In 1969, before The Simpsons premiered, something strange happened in a small town in Oregon. A power plant worker named Hugh Jass disappeared without a trace. His co-workers described him as a heavy-set, balding man who was obsessed with donuts and worked in nuclear safety. But here's where it gets disturbing. Hugh's last day at work, he reported a serious safety violation. Something about glowing green waste being dumped illegally. The next day, his desk was cleaned out and his house was empty. When investigators looked into his employment records, they found nothing. It's like Hugh never existed. But in 1887, a retired security guard from the power plant finally revealed the truth. The plant owner, named Warren Peace, had been dumping radioactive waste into the local water supply for years. Hugh discovered the truth and threatened to expose everything. The night Hugh disappeared, security cameras caught him being led to Warren's office, but he never came out. 3 years later, his wife, named Amanda Hugg, wrote in an article how sweet Hugh was, and she later sued the nuclear company for approximately $69 million, but the court only granted her $6.02.
Marlene Warren, this is the scariest bro. This is true nightmare. What happened to her? This happened in the 90s, and she was from Florida. She had a son, and this one day, bro, I don't know exactly the time it was, somebody knocks on their door. She goes and answers the door, right? And it's a clown at her door.
That's
right?
scariest.
I'm already knowing, bro. Like, that's why I said it's true nightmare. She opens the door. She's like, what the hell? The clown hands her like this like bundle of balloons and is basically saying like, you're the best and all this other shit, right? And then the clown pulls out a gun and shoots her straight in the head.
Holy
Kills her in front of her son, bro, and takes off, which is crazy as right? And by the way, she had a husband too. My bad, I forgot to even say that.
Yeah.
The husband wasn't home though, so he ends up coming through. You know, the police, everybody comes through. They find out what happens. He just tells them that a random clown came to the house and handed
shot
him
my mom
balloons and killed her. Right? They're grieving. The whole family's grieving, shit like that. The dad ends up moving on in 2002. Right? So he ends up remarrying. He gets with this girl. They're together for like a cool minute, bro, right? So they start interviewing, you know, him, his new girl, shit like that. They're asking him all these questions. And it gets to the point where one of them crack. The new girlfriend
was the clown.
Wow. But this is what's crazy though, right?
This American woman killed 300 people in one day in the quiet town of Goobersville, Indiana. In 1949, a woman named Aileen G. Annis was the beloved lunch lady at Sunnydale High. For 20 years, Aileen served meals with a smile, but one morning, she had other plans. She laced the school's water supply with a colorless, odorless poison. By noon, students and staff began collapsing. Chaos erupted. The hospital was overwhelmed. Parents rushed to the school in panic. As sirens wailed, Aileen calmly walked home, humming a cheerful tune. The death toll rose to 352 lives lost, an entire generation of Sunnydale gone. Aileen was found in her kitchen, baking cookies and listening to the radio. Her only words upon arrest, "I was saving them from the pain of living." Investigators later discovered 20 years worth of journals detailing her plans. The Sunnydale massacre remains one of the deadliest single-day killings. In 1954, police decided to investigate her home more. They decided to break the walls, and what they found there was truly horrifying.
Come on, open the door, you stupid thought! I just want to get laid on my vacation!
No way! Not a chance in hell! Somebody help me! Someone's grandpa's trying to attack me! Help! I'm being attacked on the 30th floor! Help! Thank God.
Paradise Palms Resort Concierge, how may I assist in your relaxation this evening?
Excuse me, but you need to call the police right now. There's a man wearing a Hawaiian shirt about to walk through the lobby. He just attacked me in my room.
I'm so sorry, ma'am. I will right away. Hey, Felipe, call the police! Sorry again, ma'am. Is it room 3012?
Yes!
10-4, suspect in custody. He's believed to not be a guest in this building. Apparently, there's been multiple reports from other hotels of similar incidents recently. I think we might have found the guy.
10-4, what does the suspect look like?
10-4, suspect is a male wearing a Hawaiian shirt, heavy build, very creepy looking, and he has a mean smile.
Roger.
This story was inspired by a true story regarding a woman who went on vacation and stayed at a hotel room, only to be stalked and ambushed by a man named Marwan. A mugshot of the culprit can be seen below. Police say that the woman was able to miraculously defend herself as the suspect then left on foot when he couldn't get a hold of the victim.
At around 5 o'clock in the evening on June 25th, 1999, a man named Ricky McCormick stumbled into an emergency room in St. Louis, Missouri, with his hand over his chest, complaining that he couldn't breathe. He said he had asthma, and earlier that day he had been cutting the grass, and so maybe that had caused a flare-up. But either way, here he was in a lot of discomfort saying, I need help. Ricky was 41 years old, and for his whole life, he had had heart and lung problems, and so him arriving in this state in the ER was actually not all that uncommon for him. And so this hospital did what they did with anyone who came in complaining that they couldn't breathe. They immediately took Ricky to a back exam room, and they hooked him up to all these monitors to make sure his heartbeat was steady and that his oxygen levels were plenty high. And once Ricky was in the exam room getting hooked up, he started acting really agitated, and he kept looking around the room like he was scared that someone was going to jump out at him. And he was also sweating profusely, and whenever he did speak, he spoke so quickly no one could really understand him. But despite Ricky's odd behavior, the heart monitor showed his heart was beating steadily, his oxygen levels were perfectly fine, and when the doctor came in and examined Ricky, even though he clearly saw that something was off about Ricky, there wasn't any sign that there was anything physically wrong with Ricky. And so the doctor and the nurses agreed that whatever was going on with Ricky had to be psychological. And as it happened, Ricky did have a long history of psychological issues. He was known for making things up all the time, just telling people these crazy stories about himself, like how he was this talented singer and he was about to go on tour, or that he was actually a prince, or that he was studying to be a doctor. I mean, things that nobody thought was true, but Ricky would say as if this is just common knowledge, this is who I am. And so Ricky's family for the longest time had just assumed that Ricky was either bipolar or maybe schizophrenic. Those are both serious mental health disorders that totally disrupt normal thinking. But Ricky, despite being encouraged by his friends and family to go get help, never got help for any of his psychological issues. And so Ricky's life had kind of gone off the rails. He had dropped out of high school and not gone back to any sort of schooling, and he had spent some time in jail. Now, Ricky was living in a low-income, very dangerous part of St. Louis, which is a big Midwestern city on the Mississippi River that in 1999 had a very serious issue with gang violence. Ricky absolutely hated it there, but he had no way to actually leave St. Louis. In fact, Ricky didn't even have his own place. He bounced around from his mother's place, his aunt's place, and his girlfriend's place. Ricky did work, but the work was very sporadic, and it was for the most part just night shifts for random odd jobs. And when Ricky was actually working, he really just spent his time chain smoking cigarettes and drinking literally gallons of coffee. Back at the ER, Ricky, who was still in the exam room, had only been there for less than an hour when the doctor came back in and told Ricky that he was okay and he was going to be discharged. Now, Ricky immediately said, no, I have to be here tonight. I need to stay here. You need to admit me. But the doctor just kind of ignored what he said and handed him the discharge paperwork. 15 minutes later, when a nurse came back into the exam room to get this paperwork from Ricky, she would walk in and see Ricky still sitting on the exam bed, kind of fidgeting around, looking down at this paperwork on his lap that immediately she saw he had not filled out. He had just signed his name at the bottom. And when she walked in, Ricky looked up at her and he kind of shrugged his shoulders and looked at her and was like, I don't know how to read or write. Can you help me? And so the nurse immediately felt bad for Ricky. I mean, he's got dirty clothes on, he looks thin and frail, he's clearly very down on his luck, there's some issues happening with this guy, and he can't even fill out his discharge paperwork. And so she said, no problem. She sat down with him, and together they filled out his paperwork. And then afterwards, when she walked him out of the exam room back to the front of the hospital, Ricky turned to her and said, instead of going home, can you just let me stay here in the lobby just for tonight? And this nurse, who knew she was not allowed to do this, she looked around and saw it was not a busy night there. And so she said, okay, as long as you don't bother anyone, you can stay here. And so Ricky thanked her repeatedly and then walked over to the corner, kind of far away from the front desk and far away from the front door. And he sat down and folded his arms, and then he just stared at the front door. And so this nurse assumed that Ricky actually must be homeless, especially based on, how he came in and how he was acting. And so she figured, he needs a place that's warm to stay tonight. And so the nurse went back to her station, and over the course of the next several hours, she would periodically look out into the lobby, expecting to see Ricky kind of curled up asleep in the corner. But every time she looked out there, Ricky was still sitting upright, arms folded, staring at the front door of the hospital as if he was expecting someone to come in at any moment and he needed to be ready. And so she thought this was unusual, but she decided not to intervene. She just let him sit there and do his thing. Later that morning at 11:30 a.m., when the nice nurse who had allowed Ricky to stay in the lobby was leaving her shift, another crew
from New Hampshire. Back in my early 20s, I lived about 30 minutes outside Manchester. I had a girlfriend of 2 years that I had just broken up with. It was a strange time in my life, the kind where you're sort of wandering, figuring things out, maybe looking for meaning without realizing it. My grandmother was extremely religious and would attend liturgy, well, religiously, no pun intended. After my grandfather passed away, I started going to church with her every Sunday. I tagged along partly to support her and partly because I felt like maybe I needed a bit of grounding myself. My grandfather had been a decorated veteran, well known and respected in our community, and losing him left a huge hole in her life. Even though she was grieving, her faith was unshaken. She'd tell me that she knew he was finally reunited with the Lord, and I could see how much comfort that gave her. I admired it, honestly. Faith like that, the kind that brings real peace, is rare. I think it's something that people search for their whole lives, even if they can't always put it into words. One Sunday after the service, I met this girl. This whole thing still feels like a fever dream. I'd never seen her around before, which was unusual since our community was close-knit, especially at church. She was striking, with dark curly hair and deep hazel eyes. I waited for the service to be over and approached her. Part of me was just attracted to her, but there was another part of me that was just curious about seeing someone new there, especially someone that looked around my age. We started talking, and the spark was definitely there. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about, where you just meet someone and immediately feel a connection. Her name was Kaylee, and she had a kind of quiet, mysterious charm, and I found myself drawn in. I kept trying to ask her specific questions about her past, like family and home life, but she would crack jokes and tell me I'd have to take her out for those answers. I actually really enjoyed the banter. After a little playful nagging, she told me that her family recently moved to the area and she went to college nearby, which explained why I had never seen her before.
The past couple years, I've worked on Uber Eats during winter break. College lets out for a whole month, and Uber Eats is the easiest work to do without having to go through job interviews and all that stuff. Besides, I didn't work during school, so this was something simple to pick up on the holidays. It was a few weeks out from Christmas when this happened. This night, it was snowing pretty heavily, but I really couldn't be picky with what days to work, since I only had this set amount of time off to make enough money to last until the next break. I borrowed my dad's pickup truck and started driving. The snow must have kept a lot of other drivers home, because I was getting orders all night. Big ones too, the kind that pay a lot. I did this for probably a good 3 hours, and then an order came in to pick up from a drive-through place. The house was 20 minutes from me, but the tip and everything was really good. There honestly wasn't anything unusual or off about this order. It was just as any other was. I picked it up and went on my way to the house. From a quick look at the map, it looked like it was in a pretty nice neighborhood on the other side of the county. I'd been around there before, but not really inside the neighborhoods. By this time, it was 11 p.m., and a lot of snow had started to stack up on the roads. I was also getting tired, so I agreed with myself that this would be the last delivery and then I'd go home and work again tomorrow. Once I got to the neighborhood, I drove through the street and looked at the houses as I passed by. They were all huge and had a ton of land between each of them, but none of the houses seemed to be very new. They had that typical older mansion style of basically just being really large and nothing else. Anyway, it took a while to get to the address I was supposed to deliver to. The driveway was covered in at least a foot of snow, so I parked on the road. While I got out and walked up to the house, getting snow all over my pants and shoes, I noticed no lights were on in the windows, and there was a piece of paper taped to the front door. Once I got up to the porch, I took a closer look. On the top of the page, it said "Notice" in big red font, and the first few lines stated it was issued by the county. But before I got too far in, I heard footsteps crunching in the snow behind me. I turned around, seeing a man approaching me coming from around the garage. He had a short buzz cut and was wearing a dirty jacket.
"Just dropping off your order,"
I said to break the silence, but the man continued walking up without saying anything. Once he was a few feet away, I could tell there was something off about him. I guess it was just a gut feeling. He looked at me with cold and tired eyes, then held his hand out for the bag. I reached over and gave it to him, but he didn't move. He was standing right on the path leading to the driveway, and as the seconds passed, I realized how completely strange it was for him to even be out here, and even more so that he wasn't heading inside now that he had the bag.
"Have a good night, sir,"
I said, stepping to the side and starting to walk past him. The man stayed where he was, before abruptly turning, and in the corner of my eye, it looked like he swung his arm out as if trying to grab me. I stumbled back and faced him as he began stepping toward me, saying, "Come with me," while reaching his hand out. I kept moving back as fast as I could in the thick snow, and the man continued to chase me, yelling at me to stop running. Once I got a good footing, I was able to outrun him and get in my car, backing out before he even had the chance to get to me. As I drove off, I looked in my mirror and saw the man standing in the driveway and just watching. I called the cops once I was out of the neighborhood, but the man was already gone. Later that night, though, they told me that the house wasn't currently owned by anyone at the moment, which I assumed the note on the door had something to do with. What the man was trying to do is unknown, but that whole situation has put me on edge whenever I pull up to a house with all their lights off, wondering if it might be the same man.
This story takes place when I was 9 years old. I'm now almost 25. I was at my great-grandfather's house in Idaho during Christmas break, visiting family and whatnot. This was also the first year my mom's boyfriend came with us because my parents had divorced the summer before. My grandpa used to live in a small Indian reservation town which has about 1,000 people. My grandpa's house was a small 2-story house that had a lot of field and forest. It was a beautiful house and property, and I miss it dearly. Anyway, about a day after we got there, my aunt, uncle, and cousins who lived in the same town as us came and surprised us by driving 10 hours to visit with us as well after telling us they weren't going to be able to because of work. It was fun because at the time my cousins and I were close. One night, my uncle, my step-aunt, and my cousin, who lived just next door to my grandpa, came over and visited with everybody. The grown-ups started talking grown-up talk. So me and my cousins, Sam who was 9, Evan who was 12, and Kennedy who was 10, decided to go downstairs to the basement and play our monster game. The way this game was played is where Sam and Evan were monsters and they hid down in the basement with the lights completely off, and then Kennedy and I would have to find them. They would make noises so we could kind of have easy access to find them, but not fully. Then if we got near them, they would make monster noises and chase Kennedy and I, and we had to go back to the top of the stairs, which was our safe zone. I know it was a kind of stupid game thinking about it now, but at the time it was pretty scary but really fun. Anyway, Sam and Evan went downstairs to hide, and they told us to wait 2 minutes before going down to start finding them. Kennedy and I waited upstairs for 2 minutes, and then we went downstairs to find Sam and Evan. Kennedy went down first, and we started looking for them. We just did our normal thing for this game. It was completely pitch black downstairs. The only light down there was the pellet stove and the moon shining through the window. Although we knew it was just our cousins hiding, it was still pretty scary just because it was pitch black and completely silent. About 5 minutes later, Sam and Evan jump out and scare us, and then they chased us. We go back upstairs and decided to play another round. We did our normal thing by waiting for 2 minutes, then heading downstairs. This time, I went first. As we went downstairs, we heard Evan or Sam hit the wall, which made me jump. We continued walking down, when I noticed a figure standing outside the window. I stopped walking and put my hand out to stop Kennedy. She got a little irritated and said, "Come on, why are you stopping?" I didn't say anything, but I pointed towards the window, showing her the figure. Kennedy noticed the figure, then she whispered, "Sam, Evan, we need you to stop the game. There's someone standing outside." Surprisingly, Sam responded to us. I figured he would have wanted to continue the game and not say anything. He said, "You guys are lying, you're just scared." I was starting to get upset because they wouldn't believe us. "Guys, seriously, look at the window above the TV." Then we saw Sam and Evan emerge from underneath the ping pong table my grandpa had for us, and they looked up. Evan just laughed a little and called us pussies, saying it's probably Uncle Stan just outside smoking. I knew it wasn't my Uncle Stan because he always smoked outside on the front porch, right by the front door. I then told Evan that. Sam then said, very annoyed, then it's probably Grandpa just checking out the house because you know him. He's always checking to see if the house has any problems. If you guys are worried about it, then go upstairs and check. I then go upstairs to check, but I pretend that I'm just looking for something. I go into the living room, and everyone I knew that was there were all in the living room. It wasn't my Uncle Stan, nor my grandpa, or anybody. Everyone was sitting in the living room. My stomach dropped. There was definitely someone out there. I didn't want to tell the adults because I was worried they wouldn't believe me. I go back downstairs as I'm shaking, and I tell them, "Guys, everyone's in the living room. No one is missing. There is someone out there." Sam and Evan finally realized this wasn't a joke, and their jokish facial expressions turned into scared expressions. Kennedy began to cry a little. I told her not to make too much noise. We all went to the top of the stairs to figure out what we should do. Of course, Sam and Evan were giving dumb ideas like shooting the guy or something. We didn't want to tell the adults, so we just stayed at the top for 5 minutes. Then we went back down. When we were back down, the figure was gone. We assumed that the figure just left and went their way. We decided we didn't want to play the game anymore, so we would just play ping pong instead. We turned the light onto the basement, and when they come on, we noticed the window was cracked open. I thought to myself, was the window cracked open this whole time? I looked towards the furniture, and my heart suddenly dropped. There was a man in his mid-40s, sitting in one of the sofa chairs, staring at us. We were so scared that we just stood there, frozen. The guy began smiling, all creepy-like at us. He then began to stand, and then I yelled, "Run!" We ran up the stairs and slammed the door to the basement. Then we ran into the living room, crying to our family that there was a man downstairs. One of my uncles, who's a cop, went and grabbed one of my grandpa's guns and headed downstairs. My uncle came back up after a few minutes and said there was no one down there, so we assumed he climbed back out the window and ran. The adults believed us when we said there was someone down there because outside there were footprints in the snow, and they led to my grandpa's driveway. Nothing was stolen downstairs, so that was good. We were all so scared that we just sat with our moms and hugged them. That night when we went to bed, I was still afraid, so I slept in bed with my mom. My cousins and I haven't played that game since. My grandpa was pretty upset because he thought his windows couldn't be opened from the outside, but he was glad that my cousins and I weren't harmed. My grandfather passed away October of 2017, and I miss that guy dearly. But ever since that incident, I have always been afraid of going into any basement by myself, even as I've gotten older. Although I haven't been back to my grandpa's in almost a year, I still am scared of that basement, or any basement to this day.